Thank you very much for this introduction. So I am going to present work that I did with my colleague Fabio Bodner, as Roland said, and it is about the effect of two policies, FATCA and CRS, on cross-border tax evasion. So now we heard lots about financial secrecy, and I will tell you a story about how it was pierced in a way. Some background and motivation. I think we can all agree that tax evasion by households, I'm not talking about firms now, is a bad thing because it leads to revenue losses, it increases inequality, and it also, by tax competition, leads to political sovereignty losses because states cannot implement the tax rates and distributive policies they see fit because of tax competition. Unfortunately, comprehensive international cooperation is required to prohibit tax evasion because tax evaders need to be identified across borders to sanction them. And there were many international agreements in the past or international cooperation to curb tax evasion, but they were largely inconsequential. So we had information and request treaties, we had the major EU initiative, the Savings Tax Directive, and we also had the Qualified Intermediary Program, which is not on the slides here. And basically all of the research or the econometric research shows that while it had some effects, it didn't reduce tax evasion overall, only slightly. And this was due to limited international scope, limited accessibility of information about tax evaders, and gaping loopholes in every single one of those treaties, which led to possibilities to circumvent them. Things began to change with FATCA and CRS. These are two treaties by the US and OECD, which led to a move towards comprehensive exchange of tax-related information on an automatic basis. So not on request, but on an automatic basis, which began in 2010 with the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, which is FATCA, which implemented a mostly unidirectional transmission of tax-related information to the US. The OECD capitalized on this opportunity and subsequently implemented the Common Reporting Standard, which was put into law with the multilateral framework, the MCAA, which implemented a multi-directional automatic information exchange regime. Oh, and sometimes I use AEI, oh, it doesn't work. AEI, by which I mean automatic exchange of information in the slides. And what we do, what Fabio and I do in our research is to assess the treaties, to do a comprehensive assessment of how successful they were in the fight against tax evasion. What is our method? And I will only spend a short amount of time on this. We compare a data set from different sources. So first of all, we collect data on cross-border investments, and we use two data sets. One of them is the locational banking statistics from the Bank for International Settlements, and the other one is the CPIS by the International Monetary Fund, which cover different capital forms and jurisdictions of different cross-border investments. Then from various sources on the internet, we compiled a data set on when FATCA and CRS were endorsed internationally, when specific country pairs signed a relationship, and when they became effective. And lastly, we use a classification of countries as tax havens and non-havens based on a list by Johannessen and Zygmunt. But in robustness checks, we also use the Financial Secrecy Index, which unfortunately has a smaller country coverage than the countries we look at. Now to the method, we use a difference estimator, different versions of it, which in substantial terms looks at whether automatic information exchange affected the difference between assets in effective tax havens, tax havens affected by automatic information exchange, and unaffected countries. Here you have some descriptive information on the spread of automatic information exchange. And here we see over time the number of country pairs that have a signed AEI relationship. But please note that Germany, Switzerland, and Switzerland, Germany would be two separate country pairs. And things began to pick up pace in 2014, and by the end of 2018 we have over 8,000 country pairs with a signed relationship. And under the small grey bar on top is signed relationships where information from a haven to a non-haven would be exchanged. One of the major differences of the AEI regime that we have now is that it has an encompassing scope. So former agreements or agreements before that, they were quite limited in comparison to automatic information exchange. And basically all important tax havens are compliant in some way. So let's head straight into the data. Here we see the development of cross-border investments in tax havens and non-havens over time, based on the Bank for International Settlements data, which covers bank deposits and debt instruments. And as you can see, as we saw on the last slide, automatic information exchange really began to pick up pace in 2014. And as you can see, at this point, investments in tax havens really begin to lag behind investments in non-havens, which already points towards an effect of automatic information exchange. Of course, we also run some econometric models. This was just a graphical representation of it. And what we find is that there would be 67% more household assets in tax havens without automatic information exchange, which sounds like which is a massive effect. I mean, it's a really strong effect we find. But later on, we'll say something about how to. I'll say something about how to interpret this number. It's actually cross-border tax evasion reduced by a smaller amount than that, because of data limitations. All tax havens were affected, so even tax havens, the few non-compliant tax havens were affected in some way, and the effect largely followed the endorsement of the treaties. So when international leaders stepped onto the international arena and announced that they would be pursued now. And we find only a very, very small effect of treaty signature and effectiveness after that. After that, or in a second step, we basically do the same thing with International Monetary Fund data, which includes portfolio securities, including shares. Here, the picture is a bit different. So from 2013 and 14 on, we don't see this really distinguished effect. But by 2018, again, investments in tax havens begin to lag behind investments in non-havens. We also run econometric models, but it's not possible to get a percentage estimation of the effect, because with this data we don't know how much of these investments belong to households, so we cannot get an effect estimate, but the econometric models basically point in a similar direction. To get a comprehensive assessment of FATCA and CRS, we also look at treaty circumvention. Because the former treaties, like the information and request treaties, they had an effect, but tax evaders just kept evading taxes using different avenues. And we do two things. First of all, we look at simple asset shifting to non-compliant havens, so the few remaining tax havens that didn't sign a treaty. We also looked at whether assets were sent to the US because they do not participate in the common reporting standard. And then secondly, we look at the use of shell companies. This is only with the data at hand, we can only do a really rough assessment of that, but we basically look at whether the assets that are prescribed to tax havens such as Panama or the Virgin Islands, which host shell companies, increased relative to the global trend. And yeah, I'm not going to go into this in detail now, but basically we found nothing, which doesn't mean that for example, shell companies to hide identities don't exist. We only find that their use has not increased as a reaction to the implementation of automatic information exchange. And this leads us to our conclusion that information exchange under FATCA and CRS is a success overall. Because we find quite a strong effect, and we cannot find treaty circumvention in reactions. And now to the 67% estimate, because it might raise some eyebrows. First of all, because of the difference in difference estimator, it must be interpreted in this way. It doesn't mean that assets in tax havens decreased in absolute terms by 67%. It only means that under reasonable assumptions, there would be 67% more assets without AEI. And secondly, this number only pertains to directly attributable assets. So assume that someone sets up a company in Panama and opens a bank account with it in Switzerland. These kinds of investments, of which there will be many, don't really show up in the data we look at, because we look at investments of, for example, Germans in Switzerland, and this 67% estimate only pertains to these directly attributable assets. But nonetheless, we think that automatic information exchange is a success. Thank you very much.
Thank you. May I ask the other panel presenters? There will be the Slido. But I'll take one or two questions from the floor first.
Yeah, it'll just come right up.
It will
So-
come. Okay,
Yeah.
automatic. Fantastic.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I have one for Leo. So you're observing a little bit of a decrease in BIS deposits over time, right? Especially in non-havens, in tax havens, sorry. And at the same time, you're observing higher CPIS assets, right? Are those two complements? So you're saying that
Would you mind just taking, if possible, one or two more questions? So, yes, please. Dan.
Question from Peter. I thought it's interesting that the transparent places seem to be getting more secretive. I guess the question is, which places are actually getting worse? Also, does that, how do you interpret that? Is that some sort of artifact of how the FSI sample changes over time, or some kind of random regression to mean, or is there actually something going on?
Any more questions? Or Slido is not? Yes, please.
Yeah, can I use the opportunity to float an idea? Talking about beneficial ownership. In the UK, if you look at the data, which is publicly available, what you get is the name of the owner, D. Trump. You also get the month and date of his year of his birth, and I think you get the country of registration. This isn't very much information. There are proposals saying, well, perhaps he should have his national insurance number or his address. This isn't actually particularly useful to know his national insurance number. What you really want to know is whether this D. Trump is the D. Trump you have in mind living in the White House. And I wondered whether you could ask or require people to give some public fact about themselves. And most people have a public fact, like they're a member of parliament, or they were, well, I don't know, they were even the teacher is as a private piece of info. So my suggestion is that you should require people to give some public piece of information about yourself in this sort of register.
So basically, photos, anything that goes on Tinder can be used.
I have a question to Leo, a point that I keep coming back to probably. but I'm wondering, you said that you controlled for whether or not there was an increase of assets in shell company linkages. How have you defined them or operationalized them? Is it a list of countries that you have chosen, that Panama, you mentioned Panama, or what is the concern? And have you found a way or tested for a way to check if there is an increase in residency by investments in jurisdictions like the North Task Force? Because that is sort of the main channel you would expect the avoidance to take at the moment, at least in the European Union.
Yes, please.
Hi, Renzo from the Open Government Partnership. Question for Moran. So we've been working a lot with beneficial ownership, and the governments that we work with say, oh, well, the UK is the great example, and so we're going to follow the 25% threshold. And so I was wondering if you have a few examples of maybe countries that are doing well lower threshold. I know you mentioned a few. Maybe those aren't the best cases. I don't know if you have something more recent, perhaps, of countries working on that.
All right. May I ask you, maybe we start with Moran, then we'll move to the slide, which seems to be warming up.
I think I'll first start with the comment about what to register, about the beneficial ownership registration. So it's interesting you're suggesting this public data or public information. I think what we're more aiming at is to have harmonized registration requirements so you can compare it with other countries. So if I look for, I'm not sure why the social security number doesn't help you to identify the person.
Well, you have the number, it's 9 digits.
Yeah.
Who is this person? You can tell whether it's the same as the other person who's on the register with a different 9 digits.
Yeah.
But what you really want to know is this the one who's laundering money through Kazakhstan or whatever?
Yeah, no, I see your point, but I think perhaps it's more important to have something that doesn't change over time, because being a member of parliament, maybe this.
Yeah, sorry, it doesn't have to be current information, it has to be public information.
Okay, I think it will be interesting to implement that, but if we want to have a more harmonized comparison between companies, maybe a date of birth or identification number would be useful, because if I got the identification number from a different country and I can't find it here, then maybe it will not help me to identify the person I'm looking for. But maybe as an addition thing, that would be a good idea. And as for your question about good examples, I think I mentioned that Portugal and Curacao require a threshold of 1%, and there are a few countries that require between 10 to, I think there were 5 countries we found that require from between 5 and 10 to 25%. Whether they implement that well, that I don't know, but I know that these are not, most of them are not an example for online or public access to this, so I don't know if that would consider well by you. And also one of the things that the FSI doesn't do in a consistent way is to check the enforcement aspect of things. We more check the legal framework of the countries we assess, and whether we have evidence for a very low enforcement of the legislation, then we take that into account, but we can't go into details for every country.
Right. Peter?
Right, thank you Dan for an excellent question. So it was about whether you're especially interested in the financially transparent countries previously that are becoming more financially secretive.
Which ones are getting worse, and whether you think it's a meaningful effect or some sort of artifact of something?
Yeah, so kind of one, it's probably complicated to put one graph on the slide, but one was with the metrics. And we see most countries in the 2 corners. So it seems that if countries are undergoing big changes in FSI, it is due to both secrecy scores and global scale weight. So this is very suggestive, not causal evidence, that possibly is going hand in hand. So perhaps the country is becoming more secretive and is becoming bigger in financial services. And vice versa.
It wasn't just the pure secrecy scores, I'm not sure. It was with the scale weight.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. So kind of Netherlands and Malta and United Arab Emirates, the biggest increases in FSI value, and this is due to both increasing secrecy scores and global scale weight. So I don't know specifically why, but this this is just suggesting that this is a systematic pattern that might be due to the underlying activities. But perhaps some other experts in the room can help us with the specific case studies. It might be, and let me add just one, it might be partly due to the construction of the FSI.
Yeah.
So because the countries that used to be financially transparent, the criteria are becoming stricter, so they are, over time, they are failing to fulfill the criteria to be seen as financially transparent. So they are becoming, their policies may stay constant, but they are viewed by FSI as less financially transparent.
So could it be that actually the transparent countries are attracting more money and that's inflating their FSI scores? So actually could it be making something good look bad, I guess is the question, because of the way?
Possibly, but then what do you like to do is to compare comparable countries with each other. So perhaps why is Netherlands becoming more secretive and UK is not? And although maybe UK is not. But this is something that we are going to look at also with Teresa here in follow-up research with regressions, etc. So.
As you reflect on the question a bit longer, maybe Leo can.
Yeah, thank you for the questions. I come to Miroslav first. So the thing is, we can only, you said in the BIS data, the assets slightly decrease, and IMF data they increase. I think which you got from these graphs here. The problem is that it's very messy data, because not only illicit household assets or investments are covered. I mean, here in the BIS data you also have companies, which make up about half of that, and in the IMF data you also have bank assets, which makes it much more messy. So with our models we can only show relative figures. Despite this graph, we have no idea how household assets developed. We can only say that they decreased or increased in relative terms, relative to where they would have been. So yeah, even though it may look like there's not much more tax evasion, there's no way to tell based on this graph. And to Marcus, first of all, to the shell companies, we did it in a really rough way, I have to admit that. We assumed that shell companies are situated in the tax havens we have identified by our tax haven list. And then we looked at the development of assets prescribed to tax havens relative to the development of assets between non-havens over time, and looked at if there would be an upwards trend after the endorsement of AEI. And the opposite is what we can see in most of the data, actually. And to the golden passports, we did some very preliminary models on that. I mean, the OECD published a list of countries that offer these golden passports, and this preliminary model said that these countries actually lost out relative to other tax havens. But the whole Bamberg team is now working on a project which focuses on golden passports and the shell company use in more detail. So if you have some suggestions on how to set that up, or which countries, like descriptive information about the countries that offer them and so on, then we should talk about that later, because we're working on it right now.
Great, thank you very much. I think let's move to the Slido, and maybe we can be the questions there. We can be a bit more democratic. Peter, you can choose the question that you want that address to you.
Of course, I thought I could choose any questions. I already talked for too long, so I thought I would choose one for Leo.
Choose the one for you, Peter.
Yeah, but it's more questions for you, right? Do you think we can expect a benefit from observed fall in secrecy in terms of reduced human development costs? Or is it too small, Ronan?
I don't know. I don't know. What do you think, Peter?
Yeah. So I think so. My reading of it is that there's been a reduction but it still is too high and excessive, and so kind of it's too soon to expect much reduction. Also, seeing one presentation on what is actually behind these numbers.
I mean, if I could come into it, I mean, since the issue of tax avoidance by individuals, particularly in OECD countries, is a middle class issue. Okay, because it's the middle class that pays that particular type of tax, like income tax. And in some countries, we already see some reduction in taxation. Okay, without rise in national debt. So I think that's the effect. I think yes, in that sense, but that's that's reduction in taxation on the middle classes. Now there's political debate, of course, who is going to pay less and so on and so forth. But following with the same spirit of democracy, Moran, you have a question there? Maybe you want to answer that?
Yes. To explain the importance of the advantage of having a public ownership registries over a closed one, I think the most important thing to say would be access to journalists and researchers. So we have seen in the Panama Papers and other leaks how information was available. Some of it was available to even government, but they haven't done anything because you need some political will to investigate things. And if journalists get the information, definitely it will help to find more, I don't know, beneficial owner, investigate more about how do we find the missing billions and to reveal corruption. And the second reason is accuracy of the data. So sometimes the information in the public registry is not accurate or not updated, and once it's accessible to the public and they use it, they can ask to amend it and to make it better and more accurate. And I think another thing is a deterrent effect. So when companies or people, beneficial owners, know that their information or their details are exposed not only to the government but also to other journalists and other researchers or other people that they may not want to do the things they do, or at least in the lesser extent.
So Moran, when I meet, when we go south here to City of London, and I meet journalists, or they meet me, not journalists, lawyers, they're not as enthusiastic as you are. But one of the arguments they're putting, I'll take questions later, they're putting is that this beneficial ownership registry is putting their clients in grave danger. Actually, some clients already have been killed, people told me, and a lot have been blackmailed because of this information. How do you respond to that?
I guess it's a security measure that a government should take, or when you open the company and you get the limited liability privilege from the country, you need to take this risk as someone from the government. And especially, you don't want people to know your identity, I guess, if you have something to hide. So there is a risk you take, definitely.
The same argument is being put, and Leo, you've got a question. The same argument is put about automatic exchange agreements.
Yeah, exactly.
By lawyers. They say exactly the same. They don't want it because of that. So what do you say to my friends, the angry lawyers there in the city?
I think it's a mock defense. I don't really believe that that's a large-scale problem, and the few problems who are harmed by it, the benefits to society outweigh that, and for them, I would say.
Okay, you've got a question here, and then I think I would like to open again. We have 2 minutes.
Okay, to the first question about the announcements of AEI. I said earlier endorsements, but basically what we find is that only the announcement, or the credible announcement that the policies will be implemented soon, only that had an effect. And signature and effectiveness, a rather small effect. So I think maybe my tongue slipped there, but yeah. And to the second question, how would you explain that we cannot see the impact of AI until 2017, as suggested by this graph? Two things. Firstly, one which directly contradicts my sentence before that, namely that 2017 were the first exchanges under CRS, and fully rational tax evaders should only reduce their investments in Haven at this point of time. So maybe that may be a reason. And the other thing is that these graphs are a bit inaccurate because there's lots of missing data, and as you may see from the naming of the y-axis, we had to do a fancy thing there to make the two time series comparable over time. And actually the econometric models are better equipped at answering the question of how and when an effect can be observed. And the econometric models basically show the same thing as the models using the BIS data, which is a bit surprising given this graph, but still.
Okay, a few more. Yes, please.
It's not necessarily a question, but really just wanted to add to the previous question around making the data public on beneficial ownership registers. I think there's tremendous power, and in addition to what you said, there are safeguards to have your information removed if you are a threat, if you feel you're going to be threatened. But some of the other advantages by having the data open is banks are now using that information in conjunction with actual SWIFT transaction data, and the combination of those two things really helps to like spot trade-based money laundering, fraud, and things like that. Whereas those individual transaction messages have no context in the grand scheme of things, but when you start to overlay that information, you can, and to the gentleman's point, if you can now start to resolve those individuals that look separate into what appear to be one cluster, you suddenly can really start to see a lot more power coming out of the data. And real evidence that we're seeing with banks now is they're able to now spot flows of money moving around through criminal networks a lot more accurately.
And what's your name, please?
Neil Ishmael.
And where are you working?
Dun Bradstreet.
Right. Thank you very much.
I agree with what's been said about the benefits of having a public registry. I don't know about the death threats, but I also think that we need to be careful about data privacy. We're seeing that internet can be a very dangerous thing when it's not used in a good way by people, and some very, let's say, passionate and maybe aggressive, people. So I'm not sure about publishing, like your insurance number and stuff like that. I do think that journalists need to have access, but that's something that they can ask for. But make it public to anyone can have. Also, I heard a lot of people, clients talking about that it has some commercial impacts as well, because let's say that someone having many companies, if he's acquiring a new company, that's debatable, right? Like if he wants to publish or share that information with his employees or stuff like that. But before it's made public, he wants to make sure that he has put everything in place. But if everything is public, he can actually make the deal goes up. So I think we need to be, when negotiating and putting this public registry, making these registries public, we need to think about data privacy.
And your name, please?
Sunita.
And you are working where?
I'm working in a bank.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
Maybe I can just add two comments on this data protection issue. We are not talking about making addresses public. We're talking about making names and birth month and year public. So I cannot see how that could eventually lead to any threats or any threats for abductions or whatever. And the other question is that it's a question of a level playing field, right? If in the 80 or 90% or more of companies where the legal owner coincides with the beneficial owner, in many countries right now you already have public registers with your data online. So we are only talking about giving a privilege to offshore companies whose owners hide deliberately behind the
the argument I hear, I don't know if it's correct, but there are certain governments, you pass information automatically, the government of Venezuela, whoever now is in charge, who may use this information in such a video. But anyway, maybe we have the last few words. Peter, you would like to? The question was not addressed to you, but I'm sure you have got answers.
The fight goes on, the research goes on as well.
I think that's a good point.
No, I think Marcus' point was the answer for that.
Leo?
A few years ago, the OECD said that, or proclaimed the end of banking secrecy. Maybe the common reporting standard is a better step in that direction, but I think still we only have the end of very simple banking secrecy, and the fight continues. And very rich people who can afford tailored wealth management, they still evade taxes, I'm sure of that.
Leo, are you saying that the OECD was not entirely accurate? That's what you said?
I may have.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Well, please join me in thanking